You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. Welcome to Dolphins Talk Weekly, your one-stop audio breakdown of all of this week's Miami Dolphins news. Now, here is your host, Kevin Dern.
This episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly is brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all of the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com, Caneswear.com. And welcome back to another episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly. I am your host, Kevin Dern. You can give me a follow on Twitter at KevinMD4. Follow the show on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, wherever else you listen to your podcasts. And follow us at DolphinsTalk.com. I apologize for getting this episode out a little bit late, but meant to record this Wednesday night after the Dolphins' 24-3 loss in Seattle over the weekend, and ended up having to kind of navigate a big project for work Monday, Tuesday, had daughter's soccer Wednesday. So here we are on a Thursday recording sort of a recap of the Seattle game and perhaps not necessarily a preview of the Titans game, but kind of looking at things as a whole as the Dolphins sit at 1-2, and it's a very ugly 1-2. And honestly, didn't really know what to really kind of do with this podcast. I had some thoughts jotted down the other day, deleted it. You know, normally I have kind of a script or outline or some keynotes or stats or certain X's and O's things that I like to touch on, and I don't think this episode will really be that. I do have a whiskey for tonight, although it's one we've already done on the show. It's the Campfire by High West Distillery. They are out of Park City, Utah. It's a blend of straight rye whiskey, bourbon whiskey, and blended malt scotch. Pretty good. Nice, easy drinker, sipper. I forget what my score is. You can go back and check it out. I want to say I gave it, like 3.8 or something around there. Pretty nice sipper. Good, easy taster. Here we go as we get ready for Monday Night Football. Now, I guess to kind of start the show, we'll review my thoughts on the Seahawks game this past Sunday. If you followed me on Twitter or saw me do my appearance on Finside the NFL on Reason's YouTube channel, we were there with Richmond Webb. I think we had, 5 or 6 other panelists on that show. I believe I was the only one that predicted Miami would lose to Seattle. And I did predict that loss before Tua ever got hurt. And I never felt like they had much of a chance going in there because of some of the issues that crept up again on the road under Mike McDaniel. I don't think having Tua Tagovailoa out there would have made much of a difference. Maybe there's a touchdown drive or another touchdown drive with the drop that Durham Smythe had. But the Dolphins are just so sloppy. And you're going into, let's call it arguably the loudest outdoor stadium in the entire NFL. And you're trying to run all those shifts and motions and pre-snap stuff with that crowd noise. It's just not conducive to this system. And I think the big error that Mike McDaniel made is assuming that because Skylar Thompson was in his 3rd year of the system, that you could operate and call a game the same way you would if you had Tua Tagovailoa. And I guess for me, in that environment specifically, you can't call a game for Tua Tagovailoa like you normally do. You got to get stuff in quicker. You got to get him up to the line faster. And it was doubly worse with Skylar Thompson, at the controls of the offense. I've seen a lot of takes on Twitter, especially from kind of the blue check mark crowd. And the popular thing is to, post Chris Grier's comment about, they're not as worried about as much about the offensive line as the fans are, and show, graphics of Skylar Thompson on the ground or the offensive line, not blocking anybody. Again, just like the Buffalo game, they were about 8th down the list of problems. It really has not been the offensive line that's been the major issue. It's been quarterback play, it's been game planning, it's been play calling, and it's just been bad execution. And I think one of the key factors here you have, and this kind of feeds into the bad play calling and bad game management by Mike McDaniel, this whole offense, the Mike Shanahan offense, if you go back to it, back when he was in Denver with Terrell Davis, John Elway, Howard Griffith at fullback, you can look at all the other running backs that came after Terrell Davis, Alandis Gary, Mike Anderson, Clinton Portis. It's always been an outside zone team. And through 3 games this year, even the Jacksonville game that Miami won, the worst part of the offense has been the outside running game. And a lot of that is, some of it's design, where you're having receivers come in motion and you're trying to do those escort motions and lead off the edge, because you're basically having your offensive line fire off and you're trying to get blocks with them down the field. It doesn't work without River Craycraft. The next best blocker on the team we have is Braxton Berrios, but not Hill, not Waddle, not Robbie Chosen, not Grant Dubose, not Eskridge or Ezekama can come out and block on the edge like River Craycraft. So you've had an issue there where you're basically getting free hats, and Seattle played it very well. Mike McDonald has seen this offense twice before when he was with Baltimore in 22 and in 23. They were rotating his safety down because they just didn't respect Skylar Thompson as a passer. Okay. The other part of it is Durham Smythe has played, I won't say poorly, but not up to his usual standards. As far as being a blocker, and you hear my phone go off in the background. It's another Dolphins meme from a coworker. It's been unrelenting this week. But he's not played well. Jonnu Smith is a liability as a blocker. And I think Julian Hill, who got a lot of hype in camp, is a little bit too focused on trying to pancake people and get kill shots, when sometimes the right answer is just simply get in a guy's way and make sure that guy can't make a tackle, running interference, so to speak. And it's been bad. It's been really bad. And I think on top of that, what's worse, and in my opinion, probably the worst player on offense so far, the 3 games, has been Alec Ingold. Now, he's been goddamn awful. Pardon my French there, but he just can't block anybody or anything at any point in time for any amount of time. It's been terrible. You want 2 players that I'd kick off the football team immediately? Alec Ingold and Jordan Poyer. And that's 2 of your leaders right there. They've been shit. I'm sorry to say it. They've been shit so far this season. But a lot of those woes are why the running game has struggled on the edge. And then you look and you see some of the gap stuff they're doing with traps, with whams, with counters, with inside zone. It's hitting. And I think that was a great call out by Chris Kaufman from the 3 yards per carry crew. The whole running the ball on 1st and 10, it was only effective when it was between the tackles, not to the edge. And that kind of feeds into the point where Mike McDaniel just, I guess, to me, really hard to put a finger on it, but to me, kind of from the Cowboys game last year, maybe even the Titans game on Monday night, has just not really been, hasn't had a pulse hasn't had a finger on the pulse of the game. Hard for me to say. In terms of a play caller, about the one game that the offense looked effective last year was against the Jets, who were dead in the water. You shut them out 30-0. Aside from that, since that Titans game, I feel like things just look too big for Mike McDaniel, which is a troublesome sign when you're in your 3rd year into the offense. Just not being able to go to it. I think multiple people have cited the play call chart where they gained like 13 yards and then 8 yards on back-to-back inside runs in the first half, and then they were like 9 passes in a row bleeding into the third quarter. And it's just kind of mind-boggling. Like you go in there with a second-string quarterback and throw 3 times to every run. A 3-to-1 pass-to-run ratio. And it's just kind of bad. Everything about this offense has been bad. Everything that was great about it last year when they were first in the NFL in points and yards per game, in passing, it's all eroded. Miami's dead last in the NFL in points, dead last in points per game. I don't know what they are in passing, but it ain't good. And I think if you really look at it, at least from halves, you've had 6 halves, 2 in each game. They've really only played one half of good football, and that one half, the second half of the Jacksonville game in week 1, it's really only been one quarter. They were really good in the fourth quarter. That's when Tua was at his best. He wasn't that great in the Jacksonville game, and he was dog crap in the Buffalo game until he got hurt. This team just shown signs of being ill-prepared, and I think that kind of bled into the Seattle game. And you look at it even on the defensive side of the ball, where statistically speaking, they're actually doing all right. They're in the top 12 or top 15 in most categories other than points allowed, because the offense did them absolutely zero favors in the Buffalo game. The run defense hasn't been as bad. The pass defense has been slightly better than it was last year so far. Your third down defense is, I believe, in the top 6 or 7, or at least it was top 6 or 7 going into the Sunday night game this past week. But you come out, I'll give Seattle credit. You hit a 57, 58-yard field goal, whatever it was. That's an impressive kick, no matter what venue you're at. But then you just got bum rushed the next 2 drives. They couldn't get off the field when Seattle broke out their no-huddle stuff. And it was just too easy. It's just spot dropping in between linebackers with OTB routes. Like David Long and Jordan Brooks couldn't get it together. And Jordan Brooks is going to want to burn that game film. He was god-awful, especially in the first quarter against Seattle. I think he came out way too hyped to try and make a statement against his former team, and it backfired in a big way. David Long kind of got exposed in pass coverage, and now he's got a soft tissue injury. And that's why teams have always been hesitant to give him contracts. So now you've got an issue there. The defensive line, I think, has done all right until late in the game. They kind of crapped out against the run. Miami's now given up 3 straight 100-yard rushing performances. I haven't gone back to check, but if that happened under Fangio, I'd bet it was the last 2 regular season games and the playoff game. But otherwise, I not since like the Matt Burke era have we had a run defense that bad, or maybe 2019. And even then, like statistically, they're doing pretty well in the league. They're like 12th or 13th. Nothing has been complimentary about this, and it just seems like a team that is not well prepared for the season. Only team in the NFL to not lead a game for any amount of time this year. The field goal went in against Jacksonville as time expired, so it's been a dire situation so far. And I think the Seattle game, I was expecting a loss. My prediction of the score to a friend was 17-6. I thought we'd at least get 2 field goal drives, and we were in position to get 2 field goal drives. Even in position to get a touchdown if Durham Smythe could hang on, and that was a pretty difficult catch to make. But it's all of it is bad. And I think, at least in terms of the big picture with fans, maybe they don't understand about the offensive line and the nuance and the context there, but people were worried about not having a proven backup after they cut Mike White. People were worried about the depth at wide receiver because you didn't have OBJ. Then Malik Washington had the quad injury. You brought in Grant Dubose, who's new to the system. These warts have kind of popped up, and certain guys that you've given extensions to recently, Alec Ingold a year ago, Jalen Ramsey before this season, haven't played well. Jalen Ramsey was pretty bad the first 2 weeks. Was really good against DK Metcalf against Seattle. Probably Jalen Ramsey's best game as a Dolphin, in my opinion, other than maybe the Raiders game last year. But man, the big money for Miami has to play like big money. And so far this year, it's played too often like small money. And I think that reflects on coaching and how things are going. It's just been a problem. And I think the optics of this, Dolphins fans, we've been through it. I'm not the oldest Dolphin fan who's suffered since, the 70s in terms of not winning a Super Bowl, but I'm almost 40. I'm 38. I'll be 39 in January. I've lived this whole entire time without Dan Marino. Fortunate enough to have seen him when he played and what he was, and know about him and know about how, cutting edge he was when he came into the league. And I think that's been the struggle for Miami, is they've always put out mediocre teams. In short, suffice to say, we know what bad football looks like. And these first 3 weeks were far worse than anything that we saw last year, for sure, and worse than anything we saw in 2022, and that includes the games that Teddy Bridgewater and Skylar Thompson had to play back then. These 3 games have been bad. And I think the Jacksonville one kind of lost, some of its water weight by just seeing how poorly they played against Buffalo and got shellacked. That's a bad team. It wasn't as good of a team as we thought. And, optically, and I know this just from knowing people that are in and around the Dolphins organization, Stephen Ross doesn't like to lose in prime time. And the Dolphins' track record throughout his entire tenure as owner, so going back to 2009 to present day, has been pretty awful in prime time. You already got taken apart by the Bills, and your big money quarterback is one of the main reasons why. You lose a game on Monday to an 0-3 Tennessee team. I think your car is sort of entering the neighborhood of a mid-season firing. And it's not without precedent. Stephen Ross has done it twice. Now, I guess to be fair, the first time he did it was 2011 with Tony Sparano. Had given him an extension, but that was a coach he didn't hire. That was Wayne Huizenga's hire, and then Ross bought the team and took over in full in 2009 after Sparano had led the Dolphins to the, 1-15 to 11-5 and won the AFC East. Hard to believe that Tony Sparano is the last Dolphins coach to have won the AFC East. But he got fired mid-season when the Dolphins, I think they started 0-7, 1-8, 1-10, whatever it was. And then he did it again with Joe Philbin in 2015. Gave him an extension in the offseason. The Dolphins started in craptacular fashion, got blown out by Buffalo in the home opener. I think that was 41-14. Got blown out, in a nationally televised audience game in London against the Jets. I think that was 24-0 or 24-3. And he got fired because the bye week was right there. So I think just optically, if you're Mike McDaniel, and let's think about this from the big perspective with Chris Grier as well. You're 1-2. Your next 3 games are against a pair of 1-2 teams and another team that's 0-3. On paper, and based on the talent on this roster, even if you don't have Tua for those games, which the Dolphins won't, you should be capable of beating the Tennessee Titans as they are constituted presently. You should be capable of beating the Patriots on the road, and you damn sure should be capable of beating the Colts on the road after a bye. What does it say that if you can't win at least 2 of those games? That was kind of my connotation after Buffalo. At least be 500 while Tua is out and get yourself to 3-3, which is what they were back in 2022. And they won 5 straight games after Tua came back. You've at least got a shot, if you're Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier, if you can get at least 2 wins out of the next 3, you can at least buy yourself some runway. But that's a pretty tall order when it sounds like Tyler Huntley's going to be your quarterback, and he just got here 2 weeks ago. You've got injuries to several key players on defense and Teron Armstead. Kendall Fuller did not practice today. David Long Jr. did not practice today. Armstead didn't practice today. Not looking good, and you're a 1-point home dog to an 0-3 team. That's not going to sit well at all if the Dolphins lose that game on Monday night. And I think at this point, being in year 3, and this goes back to something I've said on this show and other shows, it was kind of passed to me through a very close contact that, a high-profile member of the Coach Shanahan tree had kind of said something that, they couldn't believe Mikey, referring to Mike McDaniel, that Mikey was given the keys to a team and that he wasn't necessarily the best at administrative stuff. It wasn't really expounded upon what that administrative stuff is, but, in terms of play calling, in terms of the order of operations of how you get a play in, how you communicate, how you organize practices, how you run practices, especially compared to sort of the workmanlike Belichick way that Brian Flores had done so prior to McDaniel's arrival. Stephen Ross may not be in the building every day, but he's got people who are in the building every day that see those things, that notice those things. And I think you're at a point now with McDaniel where if you don't see improvement in those things quickly, I think that calls into question if he's the right guy for the job. Because let's not forget, when Ross hired McDaniel, he gave him carte blanche as far as what to do at quarterback. He said you could trade a guy or trade for a guy. You could sign a veteran free agent, which I think Kirk Cousins was available at that time. They could get one in the draft, or they could keep Tua. And they went with the keep Tua option. And, the first time in the season after he's lost weight, and they've implored him to be a little more mobile and extend plays, the first time he has that responsibility on his shoulder in a game, I get that it's the heat of the moment and it's football, and you're probably wanting to make a statement at that point, especially with Tua because he had played like shit up to that point, but you run headfirst into Damar Hamlin and knock yourself out. I think the weight kind of came crashing down at that point. And now that he's in the concussion protocol, and based on what doctors have said, he's not going to be treated like a normal NFL player who can come back after a week, maybe 2. Every subsequent concussion he gets, he's going to have to sit out longer and longer. And in the NFL, when you're playing a finite amount of games, you're not playing an 82-game season, you're not playing 162 games, you're playing 17. You can't afford to have your quarterback out for nearly what would be a quarter of the games if they were playing an even number. Pardon me. We'll take another sip of the High West here real quick. So I think it seriously calls into question, the decision-making that's been done at a high level, to bring back Tua, to give him that big deal, to give McDaniel an extension. Chris Grier is in his 9th season, 3rd head coach. If you fire McDaniel, there's really no way you could give Chris Grier a 4th head coach to work with. I feel like that's got to be unprecedented. I haven't done research on it to check and across the major American sports, but how many general managers get the opportunity to work with a 4th coach, barring some kind of crazy, health related circumstance like a Chuck Pagano situation or something like that. I think, you're on a runway here that kind of leads to things getting ripped up and torn down to the studs and rebuilt. And that includes Tua, in my opinion. They've got an out in the contract. If you get rid of McDaniel, if you get rid of Grier, if you get rid of both, and someone new comes in and says, that's pretty risky. I don't want to have to deal with that looming on my shoulder every time I call a play. I think there's a lot of change kind of looming in the background, and this team's kind of the train going into the tunnel, and there's that light coming in the opposite direction, and I don't think it's the sun. I think the best thing you can do to hope for here, for if you're McDaniel or if you're Grier, is to hope you can scratch out some wins, whether it's 6-3, whether it's 33-31, whatever the case. Try and get 2 or 3 wins out of these next 3, and just buy yourself some more runway. And then hope like hell you can get hot and maybe sneak into the playoffs, and you're probably right back to where you were a year ago. Or really the last 2 years, a wild card and done. That's kind of where this whole thing feels like it's headed. And I say this as someone who was at the Dolphins-Bengals game on Thursday night in 2022 when Tua got knocked out. We sat there for so long while they got the cart out in the ambulance and got Tua loaded up and off the field. As a fan, especially as a Dolphins fan, I went with my brother-in-law, who's a Bengals fan, surrounded by Bengals fans. I had time, and I'll admit, I had time to kind of let my mind wander, and it's like, well, is he okay? Is he going to come back? If he doesn't come back, what do we do the rest of the season? What do we do after this season? And I'll admit, in as foul of a mood as I was in that Buffalo game, because the Dolphins-Bengals game was much closer. It was, I think, a 2 or 3 point game at the time. That Bills game was out of hand. Like, you tried to put your best foot forward, and Buffalo just smacked you. They were more physical. They were the better team. They have the better quarterback. End of story. We lived under the Tom Brady, Bill Belichick Patriots. We're living under the Bills with Josh Allen. That's just how it is. The Bills have Miami's number. And I can't but help. My mind wandered when Tua was laying there on the ground. Like, we just gave him all that money. I sure hope there's an out in that contract soon. Because from a pure business standpoint, you're taking on and carrying an awful lot of risk moving forward and trying to pin your hopes to just that guy. And I think just kind of collectively, the fan base is sort of the dark storm cloud over Hard Rock Stadium right now, because you got a huge swath of fans who think the offensive line is just a hellscape. It's really not, but you can think that. When I think the real hellscape is sort of what Mike McDaniel is becoming, what the quarterback play of this team was in Seattle on Sunday. And you've got an awful big decision to make about Tua, whether you like it or not. I mean, I think barring some sort of what seems very unrealistic deep playoff run, I think you've got a hell of a lot of big decisions to make after this season. And I think Steve Ross will hopefully finally realize that if this thing does go belly up and stays belly up the rest of the way, that you probably need some new decision makers in there. I think I've captured everything I wanted to say. The Titans game to me on Monday feels like it could kind of be like the game was last year on Monday night, which I was also at, unfortunately. Feels like it could kind of be like the Steelers game back in 2007, where the Dolphins punted and the ball got stuck vertically in the ground. I think that game was like 3-0. The Steelers won because it was just caught in the muck and the mire. Feels like that's what we could watch on Monday night. And even if the Dolphins win, I'm sure that won't please Mr. Ross very much. That 2-2 record, if they win, would feel like a pretty hollow 2-2. Nothing about this team has been pretty so far this year. You've seen flashes of it from the defense. We've seen the one flash on Tyreek's touchdown against Jacksonville. And I guess Jason Sanders' game-winning field goal. But that's been about it. It's right now, as constituted, it is a bad, bad team. And I think they're in a bad, bad way unless they can sort of dig themselves out of this hole. You've certainly got the opportunity to do it. But if you can't do it based on the roster you have versus the opponents you've got coming up, the writing's on the wall at that point, I think. So, sorry for the solemnity of this podcast. I don't mean to be the dark storm cloud, because I've actually had a great week, to be honest. Just kind of not thinking about the Dolphins. But as we get closer to the weekend and closer to game night, that's where we're at. You feel free to share your thoughts. If you have any questions about anything, reach me on Twitter at KevinMD4. You can follow the show on DolphinsTalk.com, iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Because the game is on Monday night, I probably will not be able to record until Tuesday, depending on work. So it could be Tuesday or Wednesday before we get the pod recorded for next week. But I hope you guys enjoy the game as much as you can on Monday. I told my wife, if you see my eyes bleeding, don't be alarmed. It's just the Dolphins-Titans. And what is assuredly to be one of the mother of all rock fights. Go Fins. This episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly was brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all of the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com, Caneswear.com.